What if our entire picture of ancient humans is completely wrong? Not a little wrong, completely wrong. Most people imagine ancient humans as serious survival, machines, hunting, gathering food, avoiding danger, and doing little else. But there's one surprising detail that often gets left out. For thousands of years, people around the world were using mind-altering plants, and they weren't doing it by accident. The evidence has been sitting in archaeological discoveries, ancient writings, and museum collections for decades. Most people just never paid much attention to it. Let's begin with one of the most fascinating discoveries ever found. In 2019, archaeologists were working in the remote Pamir Mountains of western China. While excavating an ancient burial site, they uncovered several wooden braziers. These small containers appear to have been used for burning plant material during ceremonies. When scientists analyzed the residue inside them, they found traces of THC, the same psychoactive compound found in cannabis. Then came another surprise. The braziers were around 2,500 years old, but the most remarkable detail wasn't their age, it was the strength of the THC. The cannabis used at this site appears to have contained much higher levels of THC than most wild cannabis plants naturally produce. That suggests something important. These people weren't simply collecting random plants from the landscape. They were likely choosing specific varieties with stronger effects. In other words, people living 2,500 years ago may have already understood how to identify and cultivate more potent cannabis. That's far more sophisticated than many people imagine. And cannabis is only one piece of the story. To see how deep this history goes, we need to travel even further back in time. Around 9,000 years ago, in the Tassili Najjar region of modern-day Algeria, people covered cave walls with thousands of remarkable paintings. The artwork shows animals, hunting scenes, and daily life. But among these images, researchers noticed something unusual, something that immediately captured their attention. Then researchers discovered something even more surprising. Ancient cave paintings showed mushrooms with incredible detail. These weren't random shapes or simple decorations. The mushrooms appeared in the hands of human figures. Some seemed to be growing from the bodies of people themselves. The artists had clearly taken great care when creating these images, and in ancient art, that level of attention was usually reserved for things that held special meaning. Ethnobotanist Giorgio Samarini spent years studying these paintings. After examining the artwork, he suggested that the mushrooms were most likely psilocybin mushrooms, often called magic mushrooms today. If that's correct, it means people were depicting these mushrooms on cave walls nearly 9,000 years ago, and they weren't treating them as ordinary food. They appeared to be something important, something respected, possibly even sacred, but this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. In 1992, ethnobotanist Terence McKenna introduced a controversial idea known as the stoned ape hypothesis. The theory proposed that psychedelic mushrooms may have played a role in human evolution. Here's the basic idea. Long ago, early human ancestors followed large herds across the African grasslands. Where there were large animals, there was animal dung, and where there was dung, certain species of psychedelic mushrooms often grew. McKenna suggested that some early humans regularly encountered and consumed these mushrooms. According to the theory, the effects may have offered certain advantages: enhanced visual awareness, improved pattern recognition, greater curiosity, and increased mental stimulation. In a dangerous world filled with predators and challenges, even small cognitive advantages could have mattered. People who noticed patterns more quickly might become better trackers. Those with sharper awareness might detect threats sooner. Over many generations, these benefits could potentially influence how human intelligence developed. It's important to note that this idea remains highly debated among scientists. There is no scientific consensus that psychedelic mushrooms directly caused human intelligence to evolve, but the theory continues to spark discussion because of one intriguing question. What if certain plants influenced human development more than we realize? And the story doesn't end there, because when we move forward to ancient Greece, things become even more remarkable. For centuries, historians have studied a mysterious religious tradition known as the Eleusinian Mysteries. These ceremonies were considered the most sacred rituals in all of ancient Greece, and what happened during them may completely change the way we think about the relationship between humans and psychoactive substances. The Eleusinian Mysteries were among the most important religious ceremonies in the ancient world. For nearly 1,000 years, people traveled to take part in them, and not just ordinary citizens. Some of history's most famous thinkers attended these rituals. Names like Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Marcus Aurelius are all connected to the tradition. At the center of the ceremony was a mysterious drink known as kykeon. After drinking it, participants often described extraordinary experiences. Many reported powerful visions. Some spoke of encounters with divine beings. Others claimed they experienced a complete transformation in how they saw reality. The experience was so intense that many compared it to dying and being reborn. For a long time, historians believed these descriptions were symbolic. Perhaps they were simply poetic ways of describing a deeply emotional religious event. But modern research introduced a new possibility. In 2020, scientists studying residue from an ancient Greek drinking vessel discovered traces of ergot alkaloids. These compounds are chemically related to substances that can produce powerful altered states of consciousness. Researchers also found evidence suggesting the mixture may have included other ingredients, such as beer and possibly cannabis. This discovery led some scholars to wonder whether the famous ritual drink produced effects far stronger than previously believed. If true, it would mean that one of the most influential religious traditions in ancient Greece may have involved a psychoactive experience. And that's a fascinating thought, because ancient Greece gave birth to many of the ideas that shaped Western civilization. Its philosophers explored questions about reality, existence, knowledge, and consciousness. The same questions people still debate today. Whether these ceremonies influenced those ideas remains uncertain, but the possibility is difficult to ignore. And while the Mediterranean world offers remarkable clues, the story stretches even further. Across the Atlantic, the evidence becomes even older. In 2019, archaeologists studying artifacts from a cave in southwestern Texas examined the contents of several ancient ritual pouches. Inside, they found traces of peyote. The discovery was extraordinary. The pouches were estimated to be around 500-700 years old. That makes them some of the oldest direct evidence of psychedelic use ever discovered. Peyote contains mescaline, a naturally occurring compound, known for producing powerful altered states of consciousness. But what stands out isn't simply the plant itself, it's the way it was treated. The peyote wasn't discarded carelessly. It had been carefully prepared, stored, and preserved. It appears to have been an important ritual object, something valuable, something meaningful, and similar traditions can be found throughout the Americas. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous groups developed ceremonies centered around ayahuasca. Across parts of North America, peyote played an important spiritual role. In the Andes Mountains, people used the San Pedro cactus in sacred rituals. Although these cultures were separated by vast distances, they shared a strikingly similar view. These plants were not treated as ordinary substances. They were seen as tools for spiritual exploration, ways of connecting with deeper ideas, hidden knowledge, and experiences beyond everyday life. And remarkably, that perspective appears again and again throughout human history. This brings us to a question that scientists are increasingly exploring today. What if these plants were more than cultural traditions? What if they were tools that humans intentionally use to change the way they think? Modern research has produced some fascinating results. In 2016, researchers at Johns Hopkins University studied the effects of psilocybin, the active compound found in certain psychedelic mushrooms. Many participants reported lasting increases in qualities such as openness, creativity, and psychological flexibility. What's remarkable is that these changes didn't disappear after a few days. For many people, the effects remained noticeable. Months or even years later, other researchers have focused on what happens inside the brain during these experiences. Neuroscientist Robin Carhart-Harris and his team at Imperial College London found evidence that psychedelics can temporarily reduce activity within networks associated with rigid patterns of thinking and self-focused mental loops. In simpler terms, the brain may become less locked into its usual habits. People often describe seeing familiar problems from entirely new perspectives. Ideas connect in unexpected ways. Old assumptions become easier to question, and possibilities that once seemed invisible suddenly become easier to recognize. Whether these effects are ultimately beneficial depends on many factors, including setting, guidance, and individual circumstances, but they help explain why so many ancient cultures treated these substances with respect. These experiences were rarely casual. They usually took place within ceremonies, guided by experienced leaders, surrounded by community, integrated into traditions that had developed over generations. The goal wasn't simply entertainment. For many cultures, the purpose was understanding themselves, understanding their community, and understanding their place in the world. When viewed through that lens, these plants begin to look less like recreational substances and more like cultural tools. Tools used to explore the human mind, and perhaps that's the most surprising part of the story. For much of human history, across many different civilizations, altered states of consciousness were not automatically seen as dangerous or forbidden. They were often woven into spiritual practices, healing traditions, and community rituals. Many indigenous cultures spent thousands of years developing knowledge about these plants. They preserved that knowledge, refined it, and passed it from one generation to the next. Not because the plants were mysterious curiosities, but because they believed they served an important purpose. Today, scientists are beginning to revisit many of these traditions with fresh eyes. Research into psychedelics has expanded dramatically in recent years, and while many questions remain unanswered, some findings suggest that ancient cultures may have understood certain aspects of the human mind more deeply than we once assumed. Perhaps the biggest lesson is this: ancient people were not simply experimenting at random. They were exploring consciousness itself, trying to understand the nature of thought, the nature of perception, and the nature of being human. The plants they used had existed long before our species appeared, growing quietly across the planet for millions of years. And when humans finally encountered them, they may have discovered something that would shape stories, rituals, beliefs, and ways of thinking for generations to come.